The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, a woman who becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during her monthly period. On the 8th day the boy is to be circumcised. Then the woman must wait 33 days to be purified from her bleeding. She must not touch anything sacred or go to the sanctuary until the days of her purification are over. If she gives birth to a daughter, for 2 weeks the woman will be unclean, as during her period. Then she must wait 66 days to be purified from her bleeding. When the days of her purification for a son or a daughter are over, she is to bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or a dove for a sin offering. He shall offer them before the Lord to make an atonement for her, and then she will be ceremonially clean from a flow of blood. These are the regulations for the woman who gives birth to a boy or a girl. If she cannot afford a lamb, she is to bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering, another for a sin offering. In this way the priest will make atonement for her, and she will be clean." Leviticus 13. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When anyone has a swelling or a rash or a bright spot on his skin that may be an infectious skin disease, he must be brought to Aaron the priest, or to any one of his sons who is a priest. The priest is to examine the sore on his skin, and if the hair in the sore has turned white, and the sore appears to be more than skin deep, it is an infectious skin disease. When the priest examines him, he shall pronounce him ceremonially unclean. If the spot on his skin is white but does not appear to be more than skin deep, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest is to put the infected person in isolation for 7 days. On the 7th day the priest is to examine him, and if he sees that the sore is unchanged and has not spread in the skin, he is to keep him in isolation for another 7 days. On the 7th day the priest is to examine him again, and if the sore has faded and has not spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a rash. The man must wash his clothes, and he will be clean. But if the rash does not spread in the skin, but after he has shown himself to the priest to be pronounced clean, he must appear before the priest again. The priest is to examine him, and if the rash has spread in the skin, he shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious disease. When anyone has an infectious skin disease, he must be brought to the priest. The priest is to examine him, and if there is a white swelling in the skin that has turned the hair white, and if there is a raw flush in the swelling, it is a chronic skin disease, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He is not to put in isolation, because he is already unclean. If the disease breaks out all over his skin, and as far as the priest can see, it covers all skin from head to foot, the priest is to examine him, and if the disease has covered his whole body, he shall pronounce that the person is clean. Since it has turned all white, he is clean, but whenever raw flesh appears on him, he will be unclean. When the priest sees the raw flesh, he shall be pronounced him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean, he is an infectious disease. Should the raw flesh change and turn white, he must go to the priest. The priest is to examine him, and if the sore has turned white, the priest shall pronounce the infected person clean. He will be clean. When someone has a boil on his skin and it heals, and in the place where the boil was, a white swelling or a reddish white spot appears, he must present himself to the priest. The priest is to examine it, and if it appears to be more than skin deep, and the hair in it has turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious skin disease that is broken out where the boil was. But if, when the priest examines it, there is no white hair in it, and not more than skin deep, and has faded, then the priest is to put him in isolation for 7 days. If the spreading in it is infectious, but the spot is changed and has not spread, but it is only a scar from the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When someone has a burn on the skin, on a reddish white or a whitish spot in a raw flesh of the burn, the priest is to examine the spot, and if the hair in it has turned white, and it appears to be more than skin deep, It is an infectious disease that has broken out in the burn. The priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious skin disease, but if the priest examines it and there is no white hair on the spot, and if it is not more than skin deep and has faded, then the priest is to put him in isolation for 7 days. On the 7th day, your priest is to examine him, and if it is spreading in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious skin disease. If, however, the spot is unchanged and has not spread in the skin but faded, it is swelling from a burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scar from the burn. If a man or a woman has sore on the head or on the chin, the priest is to examine the sore, and if it appears to be more than skin deep, and the hair in it is yellow and thin, the priest shall pronounce the person unclean. It is a itch, an infectious disease of the head or chin. But if, when the priest examines this kind of sore, it does not seem to be more than skin deep, and there is no black hair in it, and the priest is to put the infected person in isolation for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine the sore, and if the itch has not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, it does not appear to be more than skin deep, he must be shaved except for the diseased area, and the priest is to keep him in isolation another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine the itch, and if it has not spread the skin, and appears to be no more than skin deep, the priest shall pronounce him clean. He must wash his clothes, and he will be clean. But if the itch does not spread in the skin after he is pronounced clean, the priest is to examine him, and the itch is spread in the skin. The priest does not need to look for a yellow hair. The person is unclean. If, however, in his judgment it is unchanged and black hair has grown in it, the itch is healed. He is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When a man or a woman has white spots on the skin, the priest is to examine them, and if the spots are dull white, it is a harmless rash that has broken out on the skin. The person is clean. And the man has lost his hair and is bald, he is clean. If he has lost his hair from the front of his scalp and bald forehead, he is clean. But if he has a reddish white sore on his bald head or forehead, it is an infectious disease breaking out on his head or forehead. The priest is to examine him, and if the swollen sore on his head or forehead is reddish white like an infectious disease, the man is diseased and is unclean. The priest shall pronounce him unclean because of the sore on his head. The person with such an infectious disease must wear torn clothes, let his hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of his face, and cry out, "Unclean, unclean," as long as he has the infection remains unclean. He must live alone, he must live outside the camp. If any clothing is contaminated with mildew, or any woolen or any linen clothing, any woven or any knitted material of linen or wool, any leather or anything made of leather, and if the contamination in the cloth or leather or woven or knitted material or any leather article is greenish or reddish, it is spreading mildew and must be shown to the priest. The priest is to examine the mildew and isolate the affected article for 7 days. On the 7th day he is to examine it, and if the mildew has spread in the clothing or the woven or the knitted or the leather, whatever is used, it's a destructive mildew. The article is unclean. He must burn up the clothing or the woven or the knitted material of wool or linen or any leather article that has contamination in it, because mildew is destructive. The article must be burnt up. But if the priest examines it, the mildew has not spread in the clothing, or the woven, or the knitted material, or the leather article, he shall order that the contaminated article be washed. Then he shall isolate it for another 7 days. After the affected article has been washed, the priest is to examine it. And if the mildew has not changed its appearance, even though it has not spread, it is unclean. Burn it with fire, whether the mildew has affected one side or the other. If the priest examines it, the mildew has faded after the article has been washed, he is to tear the contaminated part of the clothing, or the leather, or the woven, or the knitted material. If it reappears in the clothing, or the woven, or the knitted material, or in the leather article, it is spreading, and whatever has mildew must be burnt with fire. The clothing or the woven or knitted material or any leather article that must be washed and is rid of mildew and must be washed again and it will be clean. These are the regulations concerning contamination by mildew in woolen or linen clothing, woolen or knitted material, or any leather article for pronouncing them clean or unclean.